The transfer document arrived at the Vethra Academy of Strategic Excellence with the sort of quiet, bureaucratic indifference that causes civilizational collapse. Director Kale, 7 feet of grayscale Dravosi intellect, 4 decades of military academia behind him, and precisely zero tolerance for surprises, stared at the manifest for 11 full seconds before summoning his assistant. "Explain this," he said, tapping one clawed finger against a single line on the screen. Transfer student, Luna, M, species, human origin, Terra 3 classification, standard academic exchange. His assistant, a nervous Plinian with too many eyes and not enough courage, clicked his mandibles apologetically. There was an administrative error in the Galactic Council's Exchange Bureau, Director. The forms for the University of Ortha's recreational diplomacy program were cross-filed with ours. By the time the mistake was caught, she was already on the transit shuttle. "She landed 40 minutes ago, sir." Kale set down his stylus very, very carefully. Vethra was not a recreational diplomacy academy. Vethra trained the galaxy's future combat tacticians, crisis negotiators, and Tier 1 operatives. The survival rate for first-year cadets was 83%, and that was considered exceptional by galactic standards. Humans had never enrolled. Not because they lacked the intelligence. Because the galaxy hadn't thought to invite them. Luna was standing in the intake courtyard when Kale arrived, looking at everything with the calm, slightly amused expression of someone who had read the wrong pamphlet and decided to stay anyway. She was young, mid-20s by human reckoning, with dark skin, close-cropped hair, and a duffel bag slung over one shoulder that seemed offensive in its casualness. Around her, 3 Dravosi upperclassmen who had been assigned to process new arrivals were exchanging loaded glances. The tallest had a scar running through his jaw that he'd earned during a live-fire assessment. He looked uncertain for the first time in years. "You must be Director Kale," Luna said when she saw him. She smiled, easy, unforced, the kind of smile that either meant you were completely relaxed or completely dangerous. "Your intake sergeant mentioned you'd be coming personally. I hope I'm not causing too much trouble." "You are a human," Kale said, because there was no diplomatic way to open with what he actually meant. "Guilty," she agreed. This academy trains the top tactical and intelligence operatives in the outer spiral. The curriculum is classified at a council security level most of your government officials cannot access. The physical assessment in the first week has hospitalized cadets from species with 4 times your muscle density. Luna tilted her head. "So is that a welcome or a disclaimer?" Kale studied her. He had spent 40 years reading recruits Dravosi, Plinian, Vethkor, Sulari, and he knew the look of someone performing bravery versus someone who was simply, genuinely, unafraid. It irritated him more than a little that he couldn't immediately classify which one she was. "It is a warning," he said. "The administrative error will take 6 standard days to process through the Council's Correction Bureau. You are, technically, enrolled until then. I cannot legally expel you before the paperwork clears." Luna's smile widened, just a fraction. 6 days. Got it. She lasted considerably longer than 6 days. The first sign came during the physical aptitude assessment on day 2. Vethra's test was designed for species with enhanced musculature, long limbs, or adaptive physiology. The obstacle course had a completion rate of roughly 60% on first attempt. Luna completed it in the second fastest time in the Academy's recorded history. Not through speed, she was slower than most of the Dravosi, but through something that made Kale replay the assessment footage 3 times, economy. She never wasted a movement. She calculated angles the way something ancient and instinctive calculates angles, like a species that had spent 10,000 years throwing rocks at moving targets, building shelters under hostile skies, and figuring out exactly how much effort a task actually required. On day 3, she walked into the Advanced Threat Analysis seminar, sat in the back, and said nothing for 40 minutes while a senior instructor laid out a tactical scenario involving a besieged installation and 3 possible evacuation strategies. The class voted for strategy 2. It was the conventional answer. The correct one by the textbook. Luna raised her hand. What about the maintenance tunnels on the eastern corridor, she said. The schematics show a pressure differential that means the locks cycle every 40 seconds. If you time the extraction to the third cycle, you can move the civilians in 2 groups instead of 1 without the second team ever entering the line of fire. Silence. The instructor pulled up the schematic. Looked at it for a long moment. Where did you see that? He asked. I was looking at the wrong part of the diagram, Luna said, perfectly pleasantly. But then I kept looking at it. Cale, watching through the observation window, clasped his hands behind his back and said nothing. By day 5, the other cadets had stopped trying to intimidate her. It hadn't been overt, Vethra's culture was too disciplined for open bullying, but there had been the careful social architecture of exclusion, meals eaten slightly too far away, drills where partners were already taken, the specific silence that meant you don't belong here. 2 Dravosi cadets in her unit had made the additional error of testing her in the sparring assessment. She'd lost both bouts. Technically. On points. But she'd made them work for it in a way that left the taller one nursing a shoulder rotation he hadn't expected, and the other one quietly explaining to his year group that the human was different from what the reports suggested. What impressed Cale, though he would not have used that word, was that Luna held no grudges. She went back to eating meals near whoever sat near her. She asked questions in class without posturing. She learned the Dravosi formal address customs and used them, not performatively, but with the easy precision of someone who understood that respecting a culture and losing your own were not the same thing. On the evening of day 5, she knocked on his office door. Director Cale. She stepped inside when he gestured. The paperwork clears tomorrow. It does. I wanted to ask, and I know this is irregular, if there's any track for formal enrollment. Not the exchange program. Actual enrollment. Cale regarded her for a long moment. You understand what that would mean. A full curriculum. 3 years. Assignments that are not academic exercises. I understand. Several cadets do not survive the second-year field component. I know. She held his gaze. Not with bravado. With the steady, considered weight of someone who had already done the math. Director, I looked up Vethra before I came. I know what this academy is. I know I was assigned here by accident. A pause. But I also know that every species in the outer spiral has a strategic seat at the table except mine, and humanity keeps getting included in galactic agreements the way you include furniture, present, but not consulted. I'm not here to prove humans are tough. I'm here because someone has to learn how this works from the inside. The office was quiet. Outside the window, Vethra's twin moons were rising over the training grounds, pale and huge in the Dravosi sky. There are political implications, Cale said finally. The council will have opinions. I imagine so. The curriculum will not be adjusted for your biology. I'm not asking it to be. He studied her for a long time. Reading. Classifying. Looking for the performance of confidence underneath the confidence. He didn't find one. I will, he said, consult the council's enrollment bureau. There are forms. A pause that, coming from Cale, was almost dry. There are always forms. Luna smiled, not the wide, easy smile from the courtyard. Something quieter and more real. Thank you, Director. She turned to leave. Cadet Luna. She stopped. The maintenance tunnel observation on day 3, Cale said. That was not in the brief. The scenario designers put it there as a secondary solution for the honors assessment next semester. You found it in a 20-minute review of a schematic you described as the wrong part of the diagram. Luna glanced back. I've always had trouble looking at things the way I'm supposed to. Yes, Cale said, and there was something in his tone that wasn't quite approval, but was perhaps the word that lived in the same neighborhood. "I have noticed." The paperwork cleared on day 6. Luna's enrollment application was submitted on day 6.5. It was approved, after considerable council debate and one extraordinary session of the Outer Spiral Academic Accord, 42 days later. She was the first human ever formally enrolled at the Vethra Academy of Strategic Excellence. She was not the last. Kale, reviewing the next intake manifest 3 years later, found 7 more human names on the list. He noted, without surprise, that 4 of them had listed Luna as their reason for applying. He filed the paperwork without comment. Though, privately, he thought that for a species that had arrived by administrative error, they were proving remarkably difficult to redirect.